So, thank you both for being here. A year ago when we started, we brought people together, and one of the big questions people had is, how do we bring tech CEOs into this conversation? And I wanted to really welcome you, Evan, and thank you for being a part of this conversation and really helping to move things forward.
Sure, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start with just a brief introduction. Can you tell me who you are and how you got here? Just a real brief how your journey led here.
Awesome. So I'll kick off. My name's Abby Maldonado. I've been at Pinterest for about 2.5 years now. I started out on the university recruiting team, not necessarily thinking that I would end up working on diversity and inclusion, but found my way into a role focused on diversity recruiting and programs. Been in that role for about 1.5 years now. And as I mentioned, diversity wasn't something that I kind of aspired to when graduating college or when I was studying, but when I joined the tech industry, I really recognized how there weren't a lot of people who looked like me, there weren't a lot of women, there weren't a lot of people of color, and that was something that I really wanted to work to change. So I kind of was working on a number of side projects with someone at our company who was focused on diversity when I first joined, and then had the opportunity to move into a role focused full-time on diversity, as I mentioned, about 1.5 years ago. So it's been a really exciting journey. We've had a lot of awesome support from our leadership team, a lot of buy-in, which has been incredibly helpful and really allowed us to kind of make progress. So really excited to be sharing some of those strategies with all of you today.
Awesome. Yeah.
Sure, my name is Evan Sharp. I'm one of the founders of Pinterest. Today I mostly work on running our product teams and design teams, but I also am one of the executive sponsors for our diversity and inclusion initiative, and so I'm relatively involved in the day-to-day operations of what we're doing.
Awesome. Why is diversity and inclusion important to you, and why is it important in tech? I'm going to start with you, Evan.
Why is it important? I think for us, we think that building a diverse team will build the best product, and therefore the best business. And there are lots of personal reasons why I care, but that's ultimately why we're so invested in this. We're running a business, and we need to be successful, and we think that the more creative our teams, the broader their perspectives, the more the product will be useful to a broader audience, and so we're trying to build a very diverse company.
Awesome.
I would add that I think diversity for Pinterest is really key because of who our user base is, because we're trying to be a product for the entire world. It's really, really important that we get people from those different backgrounds into the company so that we can focus on reaching those markets and building for those users. I would also just say from kind of an industry level, when I think about the tech industry and we're building the future, right? This is all about products and services that are going to be used for years to come. And when we think about what the future of this country alone looks like, it's extremely diverse. And so the fact that certain groups are being completely left out of that conversation is actually really scary. And so for me, that's a lot of what motivates me in doing this work, is just ensuring that we're representing those groups that aren't currently well represented, so that we can build a future for everyone.
Fantastic. Pinterest has grown quite a bit, has grown substantially in a short amount of time. So part of this is really building and growing with inclusion in mind, really being mindful of inclusion. Part of this is just starting somewhere. So can you talk a little bit about how you started? How did you come aboard, Abby, and how did you really start to work together to create a shift in the company and in the recruiting process and in the internal process?
Definitely. So early on, we had an engineer at Pinterest, Tracy Chow, who I'm sure many of you know, who was really, really keen on making sure that the industry, we actually knew what the industry numbers were in terms of women and people of color, particularly in tech roles. And so she was a really early advocate and really well supported by the leaders at Pinterest to kind of push forward and make this a priority. So we are, we're still a relatively young company. We're only about 6 years old. And so we started focusing on this pretty early, which was one of the things that really attracted me to the company. So when I joined, there was already somebody focused 100% of their time on diversity and inclusion. So as I mentioned, I was partnering with her on some different projects in my work in university recruiting, and then had the opportunity to shift into her role as she transitioned into another role. And so as we were getting started, we really wanted to, we thought it was really important, since Tracy had released that blog post around where are the numbers, to actually do that ourselves. So in July of 2014 is when we first released our numbers. By July of 2015, we had realized, wow, not a lot of progress has been made since we last released our numbers. Let's actually set measurable goals around this. And I know Evan can speak a lot to kind of the decision to do that, and really why we wanted to do that as a company, and the fact that that decision really came from the top, which is what really makes it successful. And kind of since then, we brought on Candace, our head of diversity, and have built out the team from 1 to 3 in less than a year. So it's just been really exciting to see our company taking it really seriously and trying to make progress.
And investing.
Yeah, when we were really small as a company, it's only 5 years ago, I guess, but when we were really small, the team was really diverse, totally unintentionally. We weren't thinking about it deliberately. And in a way, we were kind of proud of it, when we did stop to think about it. And then as we started to grow and scale really quickly, it wasn't top of mind. And I think we sort of assumed it would take care of itself, right? We have a diverse team, they'll hire diverse people. And about 2-3 years ago, we stopped and looked around and realized, well, that actually didn't happen. And one of the things we learned is that if you want to make this part of the DNA of your company, you need to constantly be working on it and making it a focus, because there's so much going on when you're growing a company really quickly. If this isn't one of the top priorities, it won't be part of the DNA of the company.
Fantastic. How does diversity and inclusion relate to your product? How does the internal diversity of the teams of the company relate to the product?
It's a great question. I think that's a question that we have a never-ending series of answers to. We're still learning a lot about it. Pinterest as a product has a stereotype, especially in the United States, of being a product used primarily by women. A lot of women even say it's kind of their place on the internet. And there's some truth to that in the numbers. And so just on that level alone, the idea that we need a more diverse workforce to make sure that our users are represented in the product development teams is pretty obvious to me, almost common sense. And I think we see the result of that. There's some popular use cases on Pinterest that, again, to focus on women, are more female-centric. For example, beauty is a category that's very big on Pinterest that is much more used by women. And so having people in the room who can understand and articulate why that's valuable and what aspects of beauty make that product useful is just essential to building it effectively.
One thing I would add is we're thinking a lot more lately, I think, about identity on Pinterest. And identity is really important to the diversity conversation. One of the things that drew me to Pinterest as a product before I even started working there was the fact that I could go onto Pinterest and find hairstyles for hair that actually looked like mine. I have gone, and I've had a lot of bad haircuts in my day because I've gone to hair salons, and you look at those catalogs that they have in the waiting room, and they all seem to be, they would have curly hair sections, and you all seem to, you'd go to the section, and it was all white women with straight hair that had been curled. And I was like, that is not my hair. I'm never going to be able to achieve that style. But I would ask them, can you do this? And they would try, and it would just be a disaster. So the first time that I actually had a haircut that I liked and that I felt good about was when I was able to show my hairstylist a pin, and now I have a hair board that has grown, and every time I go, it's like I want to try this, I want to try that, and since then I've really been able to achieve the look that I want, and I think for women of color especially, your hair is such a crucial part of your identity, and so the fact that Pinterest has allowed me to achieve that, a place where I feel good about how I look is so important, and I think that's what we're trying to do as a company is make people feel that in whatever area of their life that they're at. And so I think the fact that we're thinking a lot about that relates to the diversity conversation, because we have to have people like that at the company thinking about these challenges and these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a good point. For a second I was like, wow, we're talking about hair on the main stage. But I do think that, one of the things about technology and about that technology really integrating into our lives is it becomes a part of our identity. And so the technology does need to help facilitate creating that identity. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So how are you ensuring accountability from the top down and from the bottom up in terms of diversity and inclusion, in terms of your executives, in terms of your managers, in terms of everybody all along the spectrum? How does accountability work within this space?
It's messy. It's tough.
Yeah.
I think what we've learned, and this is probably obvious as well, but what we've learned is that, again, it needs to be an articulated priority for senior leadership if there's really going to, an impact is really going to be made. And so tactically for us, there's a lot we do. Myself and the other leadership team members at Pinterest meet with Candace, who's our head of diversity, every other week, and go over the goals that we're working against and make sure we cascade any action items down to our teams. Ben, who's the CEO and the founder with me, he's deeply invested in making sure that we hit these goals we've set for ourselves. We have people like me, diversity sponsors on the executive team who make sure it's top of mind in conversations. And then the leadership team has gone through some basic training, unconscious bias. We just did growth mindset recently. And that's been valuable not just for diversity, but just I think for leadership and management in general. So those are some of the things we're doing.
And I think that last point is really key, right? A lot of the work that we do on the diversity and inclusion side is actually making us a better company overall, because it's helping us make better decisions, it's helping us make more fair decisions, which just lead to better, more productive, more creative results. So that's why I think it's just such a top-line initiative. And with accountability, it really does have to come from the top. There is, of course, a specific expertise that we as the diversity team bring to the executives, but ultimately at the end of the day, they have to hold people accountable. So I think that relationship that we have has been really important in making sure that we're able to work towards our goals.
And one of the things that companies often start with is recruiting and the hiring process, because obviously that's one of the things that can really help change the numbers. It's not the only thing by any means, but it's often the first step. How are you working with your recruiters and making a shift in that hiring process?
Definitely. So I think recruiting is definitely a huge challenge. Getting people in the door is really, really important. Inclusion, another part of the conversation that we can definitely have. What we're doing on the recruiting side is trying to show people that we need to think broader. We need to broaden the pool from which we traditionally recruit, because the talent that we're looking for at only certain schools or only certain companies is already very limited, and even more so limited when it comes to underrepresented groups. So in thinking about how we work with the recruiting team and kind of how we work towards these goals, we've developed a specific program called our apprenticeship program, where we look for candidates from non-traditional tech backgrounds. So maybe they are self-taught, maybe they went through a coding boot camp, and we know that this pool tends to be a lot broader. So that's one way. Another way is thinking about the schools and universities that we recruit from. So we've kind of in the last few years revamped the schools from which companies tend to traditionally recruit, and expanded to schools with greater demographic diversity in terms of gender and ethnicity. So just looking at the pool of talent at the university level, I think, is really crucial, because that's where you're starting to see a lot more growth in the number of people studying computer science. So those are just some of the strategies that we've implemented on the recruiting side.
Awesome.
Yeah, and at the leadership level, we instituted the Rooney rule. And so the last 5 leadership hires we've made, I think 4 of them have had, there's a diverse background there somewhere. And it's actually, I was a little skeptical.
Can you just unpack what's the Rooney rule for those?
Sure, it means when we're going to hire someone into a very senior leadership role, we make sure that before we make a decision, we interview at least, in this case, 1 female, usually, although often many more than 1, and 1 person from an underrepresented group. just to make sure that we're getting the most diverse candidate set. And we made the decision to do that at the end of last year. I was excited about it. I also wasn't optimistic, just to be really candid, that it was necessarily going to have an impact on the spectrum of our leadership team, but it actually has. It's been amazing. We've been hiring incredible people, and often the best candidates are people we've found from that diverse pool. And they're just the best candidates. And so I'm really excited about the results of that, more than almost anything.
Yeah, I think the Rooney rule is really incredible, and I know a lot of companies have been implementing it in different ways throughout the industry, but what it really does is it makes you slow down and find the absolute best person. And I think when, at the end of the day, that's what it's about, is everybody saying, oh, we want to hire the best people, and that's what we're always going to do. But in order to do that, you have to make sure you see the whole playing field. And oftentimes, if you hire the first person that you see, that's oftentimes a referral or somebody that you've worked with in the past or that you just pull in from that company that you worked with. And those pools tend to be pretty homogenous. So making sure that you see the entire playing field is so important. And the Rooney rule really kind of helps you slow down and do that to find the best person.
Yeah, it kind of makes you stop and broaden your network. Makes you have to broaden your network, which I think is a big part of the success, of the changes that need to happen, is to really, we all have people that we turn to, that we trust, and those are generally people that are a lot like us. And so the Rooney rule, I think one of the things that it does is it really opens up that network and widens that pool of trust.
Definitely.
Were you going to say something more?
Nope.
Okay. So obviously you're still on a continuum of change, as well as everybody is here, and not everything has worked. What are some of the things that haven't worked?
I mean, I think it took the organization a while to understand why we were doing this, and part of that was poor communication, honestly, on our part. But part of that's also just misconceptions and biases people bring to the process. And so we tried a bunch of things to get the organization real excited about it. It finally happened, but it took a lot longer than I'd hoped it would. Maybe you could speak more to why.
Yeah, I think the education component is so important. Like, all of us are in this room today because we believe in this and we understand it, but I think oftentimes people tend to fear what they don't understand. And so there's a lot of work you have to do. You have to meet people where they are and help them understand why diversity is so important, both from a business imperative level and also just a future of the world level, and kind of find what it is that motivates people around this work and kind of meet them there. I would also say one thing that we've definitely learned over the past year or so is that you have to bring everybody along who's a stakeholder in this work, right? So you can't even just the executives can't do this work alone. Like, they need the support of the rest of the organization. The diversity team cannot do this alone. They need the support of individual contributors, of managers, of execs. And so bringing everybody along and letting them know what their role is in doing this work. So recruiters, you're going to have to broaden the pool from which we traditionally recruit. Managers, we're going to have to start to think a lot more about how we make decisions, why we put people in certain roles, who we promote, how we manage across difference. And so there's a lot of groups that you have to bring along, and I think in a rush to kind of make as much progress as possible, that can sometimes get lost. So bringing it back to that, educating the company on why this is important is so crucial.
And what does progress look like to you? I mean, we have diversity reports that come out every year, and for the most part, those are really focused on the numbers. But is there a bigger picture of progress? What does progress look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with the numbers. They're a foundation, and that's why we laid out numerical goals at the end of last year, like we would with any initiative at the company. But there's a second half of that, right? And that's once you have a more diverse workforce, how are they represented across the spectrum of seniority in the company? And then how inclusive is our environment, right? So how much are we harnessing the creativity and diverse perspectives we have in our team? And so I think the numbers are a really important foundation, but they're the only beginning of using diversity to your advantage as a business.
Absolutely, and if you bring all of these people into your company and they don't necessarily have the psychological safety to feel like they can be successful, or they feel like there might be certain things holding them back because of their identity, then you lose all of those benefits of diversity. And so, that the research show time and time and time again. And so it's really important. I think the bigger picture is we should also be measuring inclusion, not always the easiest thing to measure, like a number, but you can measure it through things like engagement surveys, through kind of like different numbers around who's getting promoted, who's represented in leadership, who's getting those kind of key projects that the company really values. So I think there's different measures of inclusion that we can also be measuring on top of just those numbers.
Awesome, and what does your progress look like in terms of the numbers, but also in terms of the inclusion of your teams and your company?
Definitely, so we've been measuring inclusion kind of on our engagement survey for a few years, and it's kind of early because we're, again, a pretty young company, just started doing engagement surveys, but we're seeing some positive trends in making sure and improvements in certain groups feeling welcome and like they have a say, like they're not held back because of their identity. And then in terms of the numbers, we're going to be doing our next report by the end of the year, so we'll have a progress update then. But we're really excited about some of the progress that we've made this year, and particularly some of the exciting trends that we've seen in our leadership hiring. So we'll have a more progress update by the end of the year.
Okay, cool. So at the end of the year, we'll kind of see, I know you set some goals last year, and you were one of the few companies that did, and this year, at the end of the year, we'll see kind of how you are benchmarking with
Definitely.
those goals. Awesome. Evan, wanted to talk with you a little bit about there are a lot of people in the audience that are probably wondering, they're really passionate about diversity and inclusion and wondering how to get their CEOs to care and to work on this. What would you tell them? How would you, how did you make the shift in thinking, or did you make the shift? Maybe you always had it. And then how would you recommend that others approach their CEOs?
It's a hard question. I don't know that my thinking shifted, but it definitely wasn't top of mind for several years. And then once we did invest in it, I think I've been kind of astonished by how low the bar is, to be really frank.
Yeah.
The bar is really low. It's a little depressing, but it also means I'm excited that we can have a big impact. In terms of having that conversation with the CEO you work for, my background is in design and architecture, and 5 years ago, design in the Valley was kind of a new idea, I would say. Mm-hmm. The idea that there'd be a design team that was as pivotal to building a product as, say, an engineering team was a novelty and was something business schools were really interested in. And I think the design community, which is small, relatively, what they realized they had to do was learn the language of business, frankly, and speak that language, because that is the language of the Valley. This is a business environment. Don't mistake it. This is not a nonprofit community. This is a business community. And when you forget that, you're hampering your ability to have an impact. And so I guess what I'm saying is learn about business, right? And study and focus on the aspects of diversity that drive business results, and they're real, and the science and research prove that. I have a pin board, if you go to my Pinterest, if you have my favorite diversity research articles. But I think that's one of the things that I've learned that's really given me a lot of motivation at Pinterest, has been, wow, this really does have such a big impact on the end product we're building and the business we're building. And that's really given me the strength to push this through and have conviction around it.
Fantastic. And Abby, would you add anything to that in terms of what you have done to really build relationships with the executive team and make change happen?
I would agree that leading with the business imperative is so crucial. When we were first working with the executive team, a lot of it was securing executive sponsors, and what we led with was, hey, we should be focusing on this because it's going to help us build better, more creative products for a broader audience. I think where companies might tend to focus too much is on the social good aspect, which is I'm 100% on board with that, and I agree with that. But again, this is not a nonprofit, as Evan mentioned. Like, we are a business, and so focus on the metrics that are going to help drive that narrative forward. I would also add that companies often, I think leaders often respond well to just very almost like quick sound bites of what is going to, why should we be focusing on this? So kind of like pulling out a few important lines from the research, sending them not the entire like research study, but a really great public or popular press article that kind of describes it. So the one I always recommend is How Diversity Makes Us Smarter in Scientific American is a great one that we've led with. So kind of just finding what makes them click and building those relationships through the business imperative.
Awesome. One of the things that has always struck me since I first met you, Abby, is the storytelling component of all of this. And Pinterest is a storytelling platform in a lot of ways, so it makes sense but what is the role of storytelling in driving that shift in culture and that shift in perspective of others looking outward, looking in at Pinterest, and of the company itself internally?
Well, I'll start. I mean, one thing I feel strongly about is that we don't always talk directly about diversity internally. And the more we talk about diversity as a distinct thing, the more people can focus on the complexities of the issue. I'd much rather you just feel diverse. And so we do things strategically, like we demo every week. We have the company demo products they've built, and we try and make sure it's a diverse set of presenters. Nobody knows that, but I think you feel that if you work at Pinterest. And so part of the story of Pinterest is not talking about diversity, but just showing the results of diverse teams and making that part of the environment itself.
Definitely, and I think even though it's, you might not notice it kind of intuitively, I've heard from a lot of groups at Pinterest who are underrepresented, like they notice that. They point out, oh wow, it was really cool that like 50% of our demos this week were from women engineers, or what have you. And so it does matter to those who oftentimes are thinking a lot more about identity at work. To the storytelling from kind of the outside looking in, I think one thing that, again, like attracted me to Pinterest was just the authenticity around this work and the transparency. So we're really willing to try things that we're not totally sure will work, but we want to do something to try to make progress and then share our learnings in forums like this along the way. So I think transparency has been a really key component to our work.
Yeah, that sort of agile design within diversity is something that I think is really important to really take that in. I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up to a few questions in the audience. So think about what those questions are. So, what next? What's the next big step for you in terms of diversity and inclusion at Pinterest?
Yeah, so we set pretty aggressive goals last year, and we're going to do it again. I think we're going to keep pushing forward. We have kind of company-wide 18-month strategy, and diversity is absolutely a part of that. So we'll be pushing forward to figuring out what that strategy is for 2017. And now that our team has grown and expanded, we have the opportunity to focus a lot more on inclusion. So thinking a lot more about inclusive management, developing an inclusive management scale, really thinking through how can we make sure that once people are at the company, it's a culture where they feel like they can thrive and they can excel, so that we can continue to maintain those strong diversity numbers once we bring folks into the actual company. So an increased focus on inclusion and just continuing to be aggressive with our recruiting goals.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to stay focused on leadership hiring and leadership development. The core company value at Pinterest is knit, like K-N-I-T. It used to be a kind of a joke because early Pinterest was a lot of people who were knitting.
Knitting, yeah.
But what we mean when we say knit is that the core value of the company is actually bringing together different points of view, different kinds of expertise to solve a problem. That is the core philosophy behind the way we build products. And embedded within that, implicit within that, is diversity. Of a kind, not just gender and ethnicity, but all aspects, all facets of diversity. And I think when I say leadership and leadership development, what interests me is, well, how do we harness all of this diversity, right? How do we harness all of this creativity at the company to build better products? How do we make sure it's represented throughout every aspect of our product teams? How do we make sure that it's every level of seniority? And how do we make the conversation not about diversity, because that just puts diversity up as a topic to debate and argue about? No. How do you make the conversation about building great products through diverse perspectives and knitting different points of view together? So that's I think, our focus next year.
Fantastic. Questions? And do we have a mic runner? It's literally running.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello, loud.
Hi.
What are you doing specifically to promote diversity in non-engineering roles?
In non-engineering roles?
Non-engineering.
Awesome.
Because, like, the reason why I asked this is because I've just been finding that, you know, when looking at a lot of the tech companies, they have a diversity officer, and they're primarily focused on engineering, and I don't do engineering, so yeah, that's something I'm really interested in finding more about.
Absolutely. So I think this is a really important question because so much of the tech industry is focused on engineering and kind of engineering being the center of gravity, but we're both not engineers. I don't think any of us are engineers up here, but we're all contributing to this tech ecosystem. And so in thinking about non-engineers, I almost think of it as like companies actually don't have as much of as an excuse because that pool of talent is a lot broader. So you actually have a lot of a big ability to make change there and kind of think beyond just the limited engineering scope. So some work that we're doing, we have partnerships with organizations like Jopwell who are kind of helping us match folks who are good fits for our non-engineering roles. They have a pretty vast pool of talent there. And then just partnering a lot with folks on our partnership side and on our business roles to make sure that they're thinking a lot about the top of funnel so that we can bring a diverse slate of candidates in early on.
Go ahead and talk. It'll come on.
Thank you. I am a Colombian designer, and I've been here for a year doing an MBA in design strategy. And one of the greatest learnings has been creating effective teams from people of all nationalities. How do you work into getting identities and leaderships in teams with such diverse cultural backgrounds? And this is something that happens almost everywhere in San Francisco.
I want to make sure I heard the question correctly.
There's an echo. I don't think it's your fault. Was it about international cultural perspectives? Was that the question?
Yeah, integrating all these teams with such diverse backgrounds into one cohesive leadership and identity structure.
So how do we integrate teams from all different types of international and cultural backgrounds? Definitely.
I kind of love that part of this. We're a global company. More than half of our users come from countries outside the United States. And one of the joys of building our product teams for me has been that more than half of our designers and almost half of our product managers were born outside the United States and now live in California, and they work at a company in San Francisco. And so part of that for us has been hiring. And it didn't start out as a deliberate decision, but it sort of evolved into one as we realized the trend that we had. But also 2 years ago, we made international growth kind of the core focus of the company. And just like anything, doing that well required bringing in people who understand the local culture really well and can represent it as part of product development. And so we built that capability into our team. And it's part of the reason why we do have such a diverse product development team in terms of nationality and cultural background.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, maybe two, but.
So in the tech industry a lot, companies will start out small and pretty flat. And, you guys talked a lot about accountability and leadership, and those are all things that in practice you need to actually have defined management roles for that. You need team leads and directors who actually part of their job description is having that accountability. So, you guys have grown really rapidly as well. So I guess my question would be, as you've been growing and have had to probably introduce different layers of management, how does that fit into those goals? And have you found like, oh, if we want to be accountable for this, we actually need a director in place in this part of the org? Like, can you even solve these problems if you are just flat? Or is more hierarchy part of it?
Yeah.
That's the that's like this. Sometimes I feel like we're just living this stereotype of a growing technology company, and I'm living this stereotype as like, I just used to code all day, and now I'm managing a big team, and that transition is like a stereotype. Everything's a stereotype in the Valley. And I feel claustrophobic about that. But that is, that's the reality, obviously, of scaling at a certain size. If you want a group of a lot of people to be organized and actually working in the same direction, you need processes and layers in there to ensure through communication and goal setting that people are working towards the same goal. And there are a few companies that famously don't do that, and somehow they survive. It's not a very common model to not have hierarchy. I think the relevance to diversity and inclusion for me is most of the processes that this industry or this field advocates for require really solid management structures and processes. And frankly, at most companies, they're a mess everywhere. It's not about diversity, right? All companies are poorly managed because management's impossible. It's so hard. And so a foundational layer to doing this well is having a good, well-managed organization, whatever managed means for you. And I think some of the places where we've failed to make progress with diversity and inclusion has been places where we're just not managing the company well, frankly. And we don't have the right leaders in place, or they don't have the right authority to do their jobs. And so those two things are deeply entwined.
And I would just add that I think that flat structure comes from this idea or myth that the tech industry is a meritocracy, which we've all heard. And I think that so people just think, it'll all even out because people who work hard will get to where we want them to be, but unconscious bias and all these other things start to get in the way of that and create systems that aren't necessarily fair. And so adding structure is just such an important part to not only diversity, but just having a successful company and being able to make hard decisions and being able to make decisions quickly, which is so important in an industry where we're trying to constantly innovate. So I don't think hierarchy is as evil as the tech industry thinks. I think structure is a friendlier word we might be able to use, but it's really important.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Cool.